Shalom, I am Valerie Moody of Covenant Footsteps Ministries. My website is vmoody.com. You can go there for resources or to sign up for my weekly teaching. You can contact me from the website or email me at hi@vmoody.com. Today we are discussing VA'ERA, the Torah portion which begins in Exodus 6:2 and ends in Exodus 9:35. The name VA'ERA means "and I appeared." This parsha begins with the Almighty recounting the time when He had appeared to the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. In a conversation with Moses, He is also revealing His name to him as Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. Exodus 6:2 and 3 states, God further spoke to Moses and said to him, I am the Lord, and I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as God Almighty. But by my name Lord, I did not make myself known to them. There is something curious going on here in the Hebrew. Vav is almost always translated as the word "and." Here, however, it is translated as the word "but by my name, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh." Why was this clear distinction being made here? One explanation for this is that if the letter Vav were translated as "and," it would underscore the connection with the past, sort of an unbroken tie with the past. The conditions of the past would continue into the present due to the word "and." However, it is translated as "but" to indicate that the time has come for a change. The Almighty will revive His former promises and begin to fulfill them with freshness and creativity. This partially explains an apparent contradiction in this passage in Exodus 6:2 and 3. This passage seems to say that the patriarchs only knew Him as El Shaddai, the all-sufficient one, and that they did not know Him by the name Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. Yet Genesis 15:6 and 7 indicates that He announced the name Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh to Abraham. So Abraham knew that name. Now this forces us to examine this passage more closely. He doesn't say, I never revealed the name Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh to them. Rather, he says that the patriarchs didn't know Him by that name. Now the biblical word "know" suggests intimacy. The forefathers experienced Him as El Shaddai, a name which is associated with His provision and His power and might. He was mighty on their behalf, and He provided for them. He assured their survival during famine. He made them victorious over their enemies. He gave them extraordinary success in amassing wealth. But none of these miracles openly challenged the laws of nature. The miracles He accomplished for them as El Shaddai were hidden miracles. These miracles did not openly disrupt nature in any way. This meant that His promises of numerous descendants and a land to call their own could not be fulfilled during the lifetimes of the forefathers. The provisions of El Shaddai were simply and wonderfully sufficiently enough for them. El Shaddai sets limits on creation and operates within the laws of nature. So Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob never witnessed modifications in nature, nor the complete fulfillment of His promises. This was how the patriarchs experienced Him and His open miracles of provision. It was impossible to know Him as Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. The name Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh comes from the verb to be. This means that the past, the present, and the future are folded together into this name. This is a formula for exponential power and for the highest manifestation of who He is. Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh denotes His sovereign control as king over creation. In other words, He can and will disrupt the laws of nature to fulfill covenant promises. During the devastating plagues which begin in this parsha, He redefined the physical laws of nature. He expressed this in Exodus 7, verse 5. He said, "And the Egyptians will know that I am Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh when I stretch forth my hand on Egypt." The Mighty One announced to Moses that he would know Him as Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. So Moses would see open miracles, profound miracles that the patriarchs had not seen. The time had come to complete the promises He made to the patriarchs. By way of emphasis, He stated His name as Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh 4 times within 8 short verses in this parsha. Moses, the prophet, the lawgiver, the deliverer of Israel, witnessed greater physical and spiritual power than the patriarchs ever did. Moses saw a visible demonstration of the Torah. The Torah came alive as the Holy One modified the laws of nature to accomplish prophetic redemption of Israel. He redeemed the Israelites despite the limitations of their circumstances, despite the fact that they had been enslaved for a couple of 100 years. His past promises were realized at this time and accomplished through their freedom. Yeshua became the Torah in action for them to deliver the Israelites from slavery. With the assistance of the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, He built them into a kingdom of priests and a holy nation of people who would serve the Almighty. The nature of the Almighty's relationship with the patriarchs was necessarily different from what it had to be during the Exodus. In the Exodus, the Holy One had to disclose more of His power to Moses than the patriarchs could know. But the very one who provided for the patriarchal families and who promised that their descendants would inherit a homeland was still the very same Holy One that Moses knew. The Almighty may have been known by different names. He may have emphasized different attributes as the season demanded. Nonetheless, Abraham's God and Moses' God were one and the same. Moses was the 7th generation descended from Abraham. 7 is the number of wholeness and completion, blessing and rest. What we learn from the 7th generation is how to build a sanctuary for the Almighty. Under Moses' supervision, the tabernacle sanctuary was built. The number 7 is prominent in this parsha to reinforce the divine nature of this portion. For instance, this is the 14th Torah portion of the year. 14 is the sum of 7 plus 7. Then the primary statement at the opening of this parsha concerns the Almighty appearing to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. In Hebrew, this statement consists of 14 words. 14 again is the sum of 7 plus 7. Exodus 6:3 also contains 49 Hebrew letters. 49 is the product of 7 times 7. The total numeric value of the letters in Exodus 6:3 is 2,320. If we add those digits together, 2 plus 3 plus 2 plus 0, we get the number 7. This portion describes the first 7 plagues on Egypt. Finally, this portion relays a 7-fold promise of redemption. In Exodus 6 through 8, the Almighty said, I will bring you out. I will deliver you. I will redeem you. I will take you. I will be your Elohim. I will bring you into the land, and I will give it to you for a possession. The Almighty spoke 7 verbs to relate his plan of redemption here, and he ended his speech the same way he began it, by saying, I am Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. In this set of 7 verbs, he renews the covenant he made with the patriarchs, but he adds marital language. Not only will he free the Israelites from slavery, he will enter into a marriage covenant with them. 2 of his promises, I will take you and I will be your Elohim, are terms of holy matrimony. He offers the Israelites a divine marriage, if you will, in this parsha. He will protect them and provide for them in exchange for their fidelity to the relationship and to the marriage. They must acknowledge him and honor him as a husband. Now, because the number 7 is interwoven in our reading today, we gain further insight into this parsha by looking at the 7th verse of the Torah. The 7th verse of the Torah is Genesis 1, verse 7, and it states, And Elohim made the firmament and divided the waters under the firmament from the waters above the firmament, and it was so. The word firmament has a numeric value of 380. Now this is significant because it matches the numeric value of the word Mitzrayim, the Hebrew word for Egypt. So in Genesis 1:7, we see that it impacts this parsha. In that verse, the Creator is dividing the waters. So in this parsha, a division is also taking place. In VA'ERA, he divides the seed. He separates the Egyptians, who are the seed of Ham, from the Israelites, who are the seed of Shem. Separation, or division, means separation. Therefore, Ham must be separated from Shem. Ham and Shem were both sons of Noah. Ham was cursed by his father, while Shem was blessed. And outside the unity which believers share in the Messiah, Ham and Shem are divided because of what happened in the beginning. Now, the idea of separation comes from the Hebrew root word kadosh. Our Bibles may translate the word kadosh as holy, and that's not wrong, but the basic idea behind the word kadosh is set apartness. It is separation, being separated from what is not kadosh or what is not holy. The Israelite people were being separated from Egypt in order to fulfill a kingdom purpose. Now, when the Almighty declared that he would bring them out in Exodus 6:6, he was really promising to separate them, to divide them from the Egyptians, separate them from Egypt for the purpose of allowing them and drawing them to serve him. The first cup of wine in a Passover Seder reflects this. The first cup is the cup of sanctification, which separates the Passover celebration from all other days of the year. It also recalls God's first promise in Egypt to separate or divide his people from the Egyptians. Now let's turn our attention to the dramatic actions which occur in this parsha. Essentially, the plagues are an answer to Pharaoh's question. In last week's Torah portion, Moses and Aaron demanded the release of the Israelites for the purpose of worshiping Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh in the desert. Pharaoh asked Moses in Exodus 5:2. He asked, "Who is this Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? I do not know Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, and besides, I will not let Israel go." The plagues are a divine response to Pharaoh's question. By divine decree, Moses and Aaron begin to invoke the plagues one by one to increase pressure on Pharaoh, but that's not all. They are also showing Pharaoh who Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh is, because in the capacity of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, he alters nature. His miracles are open miracles. They're not hidden miracles. And so while the patriarchs knew his miracles in a hidden fashion, they knew him as El Shaddai, Pharaoh was about to see him as Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. Now the plagues also were judging Egypt's pantheistic beliefs. They believed in many gods and they worshipped many gods. The Egyptians had always considered the Nile River to be a god, for example. The Almighty judged this pagan idolatry by turning all the water in Egypt into blood, not just the water of the Nile River. A frog goddess was thought to assist Egyptian women in childbirth. The Almighty responded by polluting the land with frogs for this reason. For a season, the frog would no longer assist these women, but only afflict the nation of Egypt. Now the Egyptians worshipped bull gods, a cow god, and a ram god. The Most High killed their livestock for this reason. The plague of boils judged Imhotep, the god of medicine. Plagues of hail and locusts struck at their devotion to the sky goddess, the god of their crops and the goddess of life. The fierce plague of darkness was an affront to their sun gods. Since Pharaoh himself was honored to be a giver of life in Egypt, the Almighty permitted the death of firstborn sons. As presented in the Torah, the plagues came in a highly structured way. Each plague was a month-long event where Moses and Aaron warned Pharaoh for 3 weeks. Then the plague came lasting 7 days. The plagues occurred in 3 sets of 3, followed by the death of the firstborn. The first set of 3 plagues brought blood, frogs, and lice. These plagues proved the existence of God. The second set of 3 plagues brought flies, the death of livestock, and boils. These plagues proved that God has divine influence over the earth. The last set of 3 plagues brought hail, locusts, and darkness. These plagues prove that God is omnipotent. He is unmatched by any power. He is Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. The 7 plagues in this week's Torah portion were increasingly severe. Yet these plagues were not enough to compel Pharaoh to release the Israelite slaves. Over the course of 10 months, Moses was pleading. Pharaoh was haggling, and at times he seemed ready to cooperate. Moses asked for the Israelites' freedom to worship, and Pharaoh agrees to let the people go. He's going to let them go to offer sacrifices, but only if they stay within the land of Egypt. Moses replied that Pharaoh's offer wasn't good enough. The people needed to go a distance of 3 days' journey into the desert, since their sacrificing would be abhorrent to the Egyptians. Pharaoh agrees to let them sacrifice in the desert as long as they don't go too far away. His compromise was induced by the plagues in this parsha, yet Pharaoh changes his mind. In next week's parsha, Egypt undergoes the 3 final plagues: locusts, terrifying darkness, and the death of firstborn sons, including Pharaoh's own son. Only after the death of firstborn sons, this devastating plague, which touched every home in Egypt, did Pharaoh agree to all of Moses' demands. Now, as I begin to wrap up this portion, I would like to share what I believe is the most exciting aspect of VA'ERA, this parsha. Throughout the Exodus, we read that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. We also read that Pharaoh hardened his own heart. Now, in Western culture, it's easy to miss the full import of what is occurring here. In our Greek mindsets, we might even say, well, that's a contradiction. Which one is true? Did God harden Pharaoh's heart, or did Pharaoh harden his own heart? And of course, both are true. But in dealing with that issue, we miss the import of what is actually occurring here on a spiritual level and its eternal implications. The ancient Egyptians believed that a ceremony which weighed their hearts before a tribunal would grant them a place in the afterlife. In other words, after they passed away, their heart was taken out of the body and weighed on a scale to see if it would be light enough to weigh or balance against a feather. So only if their hearts were light could they gain entrance into the afterlife. During the weighing of the heart ceremony, the heart of the deceased was weighed on this enormous set of scales. On one scale were the principles of truth and justice. These were represented by the feather. On the other scale was the heart. If the heart balanced against the feather, the deceased received back his heart and was welcomed into the afterlife. If the heart was heavy with the weight of sin and wrongdoings, the balance would sink. If the balance sank, his heart was devoured by a terrifying beast which sat nearby the scales. He was ready to devour a hard heart or a heavy heart. After his hardened heart was devoured, the deceased person would cease to exist. Now, in this parsha, we read 10 times that Pharaoh's heart was hardened, but only once do we find the Hebrew word kashah, which means hard, and only once do we see the word hazak, which means strong. In all other instances, the word is kaved, which means to make heavy. Pharaoh's hardened heart was heavy, too heavy for the scales in the weighing of the heart ceremony. Pharaoh's hardened heart during those negotiations with Moses was working against him in an eternal sense. His hardened heart would never balance against that feather in the weighing of the heart ceremony after he died. In fact, it disqualified him from entrance into the Egyptian afterlife. That was the effect of his hardened heart. The Exodus story is marked by heaviness and by death. I think it's because it's a depiction of Pharaoh's heart, which is heavy and dark. By contrast, the Israelites were not heavy. They felt light. They had light in their homes in Goshen during the plague of darkness. Their hearts felt light as feathers, and they experienced the light of divine deliverance. They experienced the light of His presence. The divine presence was with them. They experienced the light of redemption. And so we see a great contrast here between the darkness and heaviness of Pharaoh's heart and the lightness of the hearts of the Israelites. Now, in that lightness, we see two meanings. It is not only as light as a feather, their hearts are as light as feathers, but they're also filled with the light of the knowledge of Torah, with the light of the knowledge of the divine, because He revealed Himself as Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh to them. They knew Him. They saw Him when He parted the sea. They saw Him as Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. They had the light of the divine presence, and they saw those open miracles. That's what we see in this parsha. We see the contrast of heaviness and darkness compared with light. We see the contrast of the plagues with the freedom of the Israelites. In one, the Egyptians are being hindered. In the other, the Israelites are being set free. So we have contrasts in this parsha. But if we truly trust Him, I believe that we will dwell on the light, dwell on the redemption and the deliverance in this Torah portion. In John 12:36, Yeshua said, "While you have the light, believe in the light, that you may become children of light." This is a message for us. The Father was drawing the Israelites out of Egypt to make them children of light. He's drawing you and me today to His very self to make us children of light. That's His desire for us. That is His call for us. Yeshua said in 5:14, "You are the light of the world." And so let the light in this Torah portion be an inspiration to us. I am Valerie Moody of Covenant Footsteps Ministries. Thank you for joining me. Shalom.